Hi everyone, my name is King IV, and this is an idea workshop for ACC 626 on procurement. In this case, we're handling vendor payments, and we have about 6 different tests. So one, we're looking for duplicate payments. Two, we're looking for vendors that don't exist on the vendor master file, at least the active vendor master file. And then three, we're looking for split purchase orders. Four, we're looking for purchase orders created after the fact, so created after the invoice or after the payment date. And then as well, we're looking for payments that exceed the purchase order. And then lastly, we're just going to do a quick comparison of approvals relative to the purchase order. So let's get started. So I have idea open and I have the data already imported. So hopefully at this point everyone knows how to import data. If not, visit the introductory videos. I'll include a link in the description below. So the first one we want to look for is duplicate payments. So how we define duplicate payments: same vendor, same invoice, same amount. So we actually don't need to go to, we could go to the duplicate payments table, but in this case I'm just going to work out of the invoice table because it contains all that information already. Okay, so let's get started. So here we're going to use duplicate key detection, and then we're going to do it based off of so the same vendor number, same vendor invoice number, and then the same amount. And we're just going to press OK, and we're going to call this duplicate payments. And now you'll see here we have a series of duplicate payments that we will need to go and investigate later on. Okay, perfect. So the first one's done. Next one is comparing the vendors paid to the vendor master file. So if we look here on this payment file, I don't actually have the invoice number, the vendor number. It's actually located in the invoice file. So here we're going to do a quick join with the invoice file, and we're going to go all records in the primary, and we're going to call this payments invoice join. And we're going to match on a couple different, we're going to match on the invoice ID within the company. Perfect. And we'll just include all the fields for now. Sorry, I just re-imported the data. I realized that there was a data integrity issue that I had fixed, but I forgot to re-import the data. But anyways, continuing on. So what we want to look for are vendors that are not on the vendor file. So pretty simple. We're going to do a simple join with the vendor master file. And we're going to join based off of the vendor number and vendor ID. And then we're going to go, oh, nope, that's not what I want. Okay, let's redo that one. So I want to go records with no secondary match. Here I'm going to the vendor number, and then here I'm going to call it payments no vendor master record. And then this will show me all the payments where there's no vendor master record. It's going to quickly delete this table. And then as well, we could obviously further summarize based off of the vendor number, subtotal amount, and we'll call this payments no VM sum. And there you go. So you can see it's isolated really to 2 different vendors. Okay, good to know. Okay, the next thing we'll need to do is we need to split purchase orders. So here I created an assumption created within 1 day of each other. And normally you would do 1 week of each other, but in this case it's just a little bit simpler to show, and you get the same idea when you apply it. So let's go to purchase order. So the first thing we need to do is sort this data. We need to sort this data, or we can in fact actually leave this data. So the concept we're going to do here is we're going to do three joins. No, 2 joins with this data. We need to do 2 joins with this data. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to use the create date and then calculate the before date and the after date and determine whether or not there are any records before and after with the same vendor number. Okay, so let's get started. So we do need to create another table in order to do this. So I'm going to call this PO number V2, and we don't need to run any filters here. There are several ways you can do this, but I think this is actually conceptually the easiest way. So we're going to call it create date previous. And there may be a better way of doing this, but this is what I found the easiest way of doing it, is using this function to convert the date to a number of days, add 1, then convert it back to a date. So here we're going to use this function called d2days, and we're going to put the create date 3 in here. And then what we're going to do afterwards this is we're going to add 1 here. So we increment, or we doing -1, sorry. And then here, then I'm simply just going to use the days to d function, which will return it back to the, I'm just going to return it back to the date format. So you can see here on here. We'll press OK. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to double click in here, we're going to take the formula quickly, just so I don't have to type it again. We're going to append a new field, make it a virtual date. And then essentially we're just going to use the same formula +1, which is then going to be create date next. Okay. And now we're going to do a series of joins. So here I'm going to join it back with the original PO data. Except for this time I'm going to match on the vendor number and as well, in this case I'm going to use the previous date first, and then here I'm going to match on the create date. So this will tell me whether or not there were any PO records on the previous date. And some of you may be thinking like, oh, wouldn't we check for the same date? Technically, yes, we should do a summarization first, but I purposely created this data to not have any of those issues. And those are, to be honest, less common. Actually, I'm just going to quickly rerun this. And the only thing I really care about here is the amount field. I'm just going to delete this record. That's fine. Anyways, I'm going to rename this table. We're going to have a final record anyways. So here I'm going to join again with the PO database. And then similarly, I'm going to match on vendor number. And then as well, based off of create date next. And with the create date. And I'm going to call this PO number split validation. I'll do all records in the primary, even though technically it shouldn't matter conceptually. Okay, in this case I include all the fields again, but that's fine. So here I'm gonna create a new field. I'm gonna call it PO amount total split. Make it to 2 decimal places. And we're essentially just going to add up the 3 amounts. Plus amount 1 plus amount 2. So you can see here the amounts. And then essentially what we're going to do is to see whether or not the approver would have changed had it been this higher amount. So essentially what we're going to do here is I'm going to go to this approver chart, and you'll see here the various approver levels. So pretty much up to 50,000, up to 75,000, up to 100,000, and everything above 100,000 has to be approved by approver 4. So let's create a new field. Let's go approver ID split. In this case, I'm going to make it a character only because I think I made the other one a character. And then we're essentially just going to go through some series of if statements. So if we go amount total split is greater than 100,000. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to say 4, which means like the approver 4. Or I'm going to put quotation 4. And then we're going to go amount split, total split, is greater than 75,000. I should say greater than or equal to 75,000. Then it should be 3. Oh, I forgot to include the if statement here. Then I'm going to go if amount total split is greater than or equal to, oh, this shouldn't be quotations. It should be 75,000. Then it should be 2. Otherwise, it should be 1. And we just close that out. I'm just going to evaluate this. So that makes sense. 2, 4. Okay. Yep. Perfect. And we'll just do a quick scan to make sure it makes sense. Okay. And then we are simply just going to go approver changed. And then we're going to say either yes or no. And then all we're going to do here is we're going to say, is approver ID not equal to approver ID split? Then yes, otherwise no. Okay, this looks like this one's probably a string. That's probably why. So I'm just going to convert that. Depends on how you import it as well. So you may not need to do that string component. Okay, perfect. And then now what we're going to do is we're just going to do a quick check. So let's actually export this. We're going to call this split issues. And we're essentially going to say when amount or approver changed equals yes. I'm not going to include all the fields. I'm not going to include all these duplicate keys or these keys, extra keys that we had added. I should include this amount though. I don't need this quantity amount. I'll just make it a little bit easier to compare. Okay, so you can see here we have a whole bunch of split issues. So you can see here approver ID 1 because it was less than 50,000 and it was 35,000, and now it's 85,000. It should have been approver 3. Perfect. So now we have all these issues that we need to follow up on, and you can see that people have been taking advantage of the system. Okay, perfect. So the next one is purchase orders created after the fact. So what we need to do here is we're looking for purchase orders created after the invoice has been created. So here we're just going to do a simple join with the invoice file. In this case, I only want the invoice date. And then here I'm going to join based off of the purchase order. This gets a little... Actually, before this, just because there are, if we go to the invoice file, there are multiple purchase orders for every purchase order number. So in order to make sure, we could then do the join this on this side, or we can do it on the other side. Let's just do it on this side so we can identify all the various instances where there are issues. So here I'm going to do a join with the purchase order number. In this case, I'm only interested in the create date. And then I'm going to do it based off of purchase order number. And I'm going to call this invoice PO. Because you can pay multiple invoices, and that typically does happen against a single purchase order. The other way to do it would have been to obtain the earliest one, but we'll just leave this as is. So all I'm going to do is identify all the invoice numbers that were created, or all the invoice numbers that were before the create date. So here I'm going to go invoiced PO created late. So give me all the create dates that are greater than the invoice date. Okay, let's see what the issue is here. It might be that one of them are not a date. So it looks like here my invoice date is not a date, and then the mask is okay. Perfect. There you go. So you may have not run into that issue if you've imported your dates correctly. So we're going to say PO created after is greater than invoice date. I could have did it here as well, but that's fine. So here, now we've identified all the, not necessarily all the POs. And then what I recommend is let's join this back with the PO data, just so that we can get the raw POs that were created too early. So here we're going to go to invoice. And we're going to call this PO numbers late creation. And then in this case, we're going to match them up on purchase order number. And I guess we probably just take the invoice date. Actually, we probably don't. Yeah, we'll just take the invoice date. That way, now here you go. Now we have all the purchase orders that we're going to follow up on, but they relate to all these various invoices. So you can see that some of them have very chronic issues. Perfect. Okay. So the next thing is payments that exceed purchase orders. Okay. So if we go to this payment invoice join, we should have the purchase order number here. So perfect. So what we're going to do here is we're going to summarize on the purchase order number, and we're going to subtotal the amount, and then we're going to call this payment PO sum. Perfect. And then we're literally just going to join it with the purchase order data. In this case, we'll just do all records in the primary, and we're going to call this payment PO join. In this case, I just need the purchase order number and as well their amount. Oh, I gotta include the keys. Perfect. And then essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm going to then extract it here, and I'm going to say payments exceed PO amount. And we're just going to call it amount sum is greater than amount. You can put a threshold if you want. Oftentimes people will build in a Slack saying like 10%, 5%, etc. So you can, and then here I'm just going to quickly create a variance field, and then I'm just going to go amount sum minus amount. Okay, it doesn't like the minus amount. And then you can run some field stats to figure out how big the variance is. So you can see the variance is quite large, 55 million. And then as well, you can obviously sort that from highest to lowest. So you can see some of these are like 1 cent off, so it's not really that big a deal. I'd probably recommend that you put a threshold when you're doing your analysis and doing your follow-up. Not going to do it here, but just something for you to know, especially for those of you that are going to write a memo on this. Okay, perfect. So let's keep chugging along. So payments exceed purchase order, and then inappropriate approval of purchase orders. Okay, so there's a number of ways we could do this. I'm just going to go with the simplest way is one, we already had this field that we had calculated around the purchase order split. So why don't we leverage that? This basically tells us what the approver should have been. So if we go here and we create approver ID recalculated, and let's change this to a virtual character 1, and let's just leverage this formula. So instead of amount split, we're going to use amount, and instead of amount split here, we're going to use amount. And as well, we're going to use amount here. And then we are simply just going to create a new table, and we're going to call it PO issues approver. And then essentially what I'm going to do is here just compare the recalculated approver ID to this new one. Okay, yep, I forgot that my approver ID is probably a number, so I'm just going to quickly convert that. That may not be an issue if you've imported it correctly. So there you go. Doesn't look like we have any validation issues relating to that. Perfect. So if you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. I know this is a little bit longer video. There's many other procedures. And for those of you in my class, make sure that you do the additional procedures, document it, tell me why, what the risk areas are. And I look forward to speaking to you next time. And thank you.